1929, the New York stock market crashed and brought with it America's economy, plunging millions of Americans into unemployment and debt. The Great Depression was the worst economic recession of the 20th century. One of the many solutions proposed by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a Civilian Conservation Corps, otherwise known as the CCC. The Civilian Conservation Corps consisted of young men who would work paycheck to paycheck just to support their families, who most of the time they didn't even get to see. The main goal of the CCC was to improve America's infrastructure as well as improving America's wilderness. The creation of the Civilian Conservation Corps was a major turning point in the U.S. government's approach to unemployment. Not only did it hold the title of the American government's first work program, but it was one of the main factors of revitalizing the American population, pulling it out of the Great Depression. At the time of the stock market crash on October 29, 1929, there were two main ideas about the causes of the Great Depression. Those who were supporters of the president, Herbert Hoover, believed that Europe's broken economies as a result of World War I were to blame. Hoover believed that these broken economies of Germany, Austria, and others had somehow spread their misfortune to a vibrant, prosperous America. On the other hand, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his supporters believed that the economy under the Coolidge and Hoover administrations of the 1920s and early 1930s were seriously flawed because there were not enough regulations on the economy in order to protect the explosive expansionism that occurred. Roosevelt saw that most companies had put a majority of their monetary production into profits rather than salaries and wages. In addition, at the time of the stock market crash, the 0.1% of wealthy Americans' salaries equated to the bottom 42% of Americans. To Roosevelt, these facts and statistics were a major cue that America needed economic and business regulations. Herbert Hoover's presidency, which lasted from 1929 until 1933, only provided the stepping stone for which Roosevelt was able to build off of. Even though Hoover was a proponent of individualism and thus not providing government work programs, he was a very strong advocate for progressivism. Progressivism was a movement during the 1920s that pushed for a regulated economy, among other things. Specifically, Hoover pushed for regulations and laws that put the federal government in a more central and controlling position in order to make sure that all economic trade was fair. As a result of Hoover's actions, the Federal Reserve was created as well as Americans having to pay an income tax. Hoover's inability or refusal to create government work programs proved to be his kryptonite and was one fact of why he was not re-elected for a second term, and Roosevelt was ultimately able to step in and lead America out of the Great Depression. CCC, 500,000 men were employed throughout 2,500 camps across the nation. To put that number into perspective, the Civilian Conservation Corps had enlisted a total of 3 million single men over its 9-year existence. With all those men across the nation, production was high, meaning the CCC was extremely effective. These men would do a number of things: battle forest fires, develop campgrounds of national parks, improve grazing lands, fight soil erosion, and preserve restored historical sites. The following clip displays one of many CCC projects.
The inflammability of the sand pine required that immediate protective steps be taken against fire. Roads and fire breaks were built. Today, CCC enrollee smoke eaters, backed by modern firefighting equipment and other precautionary measures, insure against fire losses digging too deeply into this new forest treasury of public wealth.
The Civilian Conservation Corps' main goal was reforestation, and from 1933 to 1942, the CCC planted more than 75% of trees on public land. Members of the CCC benefited from the labor in not only a physical way, but mentally as well. Being outdoors allowed the young men to deepen their perspective on living and the world. However, white males part of the CCC often did not like to be associated with black males, and when a black camp was established close to a white camp, the white members would protest the black camps. When the National Youth Administration was created in 1935, the number of members in the CCC dropped overall, which also led to President Roosevelt wanting to close camps in the best interests of the economy, when making those camps was the best interests of the economy in the first place. But without people in camps, it was costing $5,000 to $10,000 a month to keep them running. The following is another project of the CCC.
They set aside a 100,000-acre tract as a game refuge. A natural sanctuary for the thousands of deer and other animals that make their homes and raise their young within its sheltering safety. An open school of nature for the study of wildlife.
January 1937 marked Roosevelt's attempt to have legislation pass the CCC as a permanent agency of the government. Unfortunately for Roosevelt, his beloved CCC was not made a permanent agency of the government due to the demand not being passed. With the economy now beginning to thrive, the Civilian Conservation Corps started to lose its importance. However, during this time, the director of the CCC, James McKinty, attempted to hold purpose of the CCC by molding the activities of the Corps to cater to the nation's defense needs. This being said, a demand was made to abolish all of the government spending unless directly related to the war. So in December 1941, the Joint Committee on Non-Essential Federal Expenditures suggested that the CCC come to an end. Even with the President's attempts, the Civilian Conservation Corps was abolished in June 1942, as the Senate decided to stop further funding the agency. Gone but not forgotten, one can say. About 30 years later, in 1979, the California Conservation Corps was established, and only a few years later, in 1983, the Wisconsin Conservation Corps was established. The two corps used the New Deal agency, the CCC, as their model. The Civilian Conservation Corps helped raise the wealth of the nation while preserving nature so we can see it as we do today.